These are the horrifying last minutes of Charla Nash, mauled by a chimpanzee. With one pull, he removed a hand. With one claw swipe, he tore chunks of flesh. That's what Travis the chimpanzee did to a woman. This story dates back to 16 years ago, but is still one of the most horrifying and gut-wrenching stories that has ever surfaced on Earth. A chimpanzee raised by a woman like a child, creating an untouchable bond, forgetting the dangers that these intellectual animals have. On the morning of February 16, 2009, it dawned cold and overcast in Stamford, Connecticut. A blanket of fresh snow covered the quiet suburban streets of this affluent community. The temperature hovered just below freezing, and most residents were bundled up inside their warm homes, going about their Monday morning routines. But for 55-year-old Charla Nash, this seemingly ordinary Monday would begin like any other, with a phone call from her dear friend Sandra Harold asking for help. Little did Charla know that this simple act of friendship would change her life forever in the most horrifying and unimaginable way possible. Charla Nash had always been the kind of person others could count on without question. Born and raised in Connecticut, she had spent her entire adult life putting others before herself, embodying the values of loyalty, compassion, and selflessness that defined her character. A devoted mother and grandmother, Charla had raised her daughter Brianna as a single parent, working multiple jobs just to ensure her child had every opportunity in life. For years, Charla had worked as a personal assistant, a job that perfectly suited her nurturing personality and attention to detail. She had a gift for anticipating people's needs and making their lives easier, whether it was organizing schedules, running errands, or simply being a listening ear during difficult times. Charla's gentle nature and genuine care for others made her beloved in her community, where she was known for volunteering at local charities and always being the first to offer help when neighbors faced hardships. Her friendship with Sandra Harold stretched back decades. They met through mutual friends in the 1980s and had maintained a close bond ever since. When Sandra's husband Jerome passed away suddenly from cancer in 2004, Charla had been one of the first people at her friend's side, helping with funeral arrangements and providing emotional support during the darkest period of Sandra's life. Their friendship had only grown stronger over the years, with Charla often stopping by Sandra's house for coffee and conversation, especially after Sandra began struggling with the loneliness that followed her husband's death. Sandra Harold, at 70 years old, was a wealthy widow who lived alone in a large, expensive house on Rock Rimmon Road in North Stamford. But despite her financial security, Sandra had been battling severe depression and isolation since Jerome's death. The couple had been married for over 40 years, and his absence left a void in Sandra's life that seemed impossible to fill. It was during this period of grief that Sandra made a decision that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In an attempt to fill the emotional emptiness in her life, she had purchased a 3-day-old chimpanzee for $50,000 from a breeder in Missouri. She named him Travis after the country singer Travis Tritt, and from the moment she brought him home, Sandra treated the chimp not as a pet, but as her surrogate child and constant companion. She fed him human food from her own plate, dressed him in children's clothes, and even allowed him to sleep in her bed. Travis had his own room in Sandra's house, complete with a computer, television, and an extensive collection of toys. Travis quickly became a local celebrity in Stamford and beyond. He appeared in television commercials for Coca-Cola and Old Navy, charming audiences with his seemingly human-like behaviors. He could use a computer, drink from a wine glass, and even drive a car around Sandra's property. Local newspapers featured stories about the unusual pet, and Sandra proudly showed Travis's abilities to visitors, genuinely believing that she had created a unique and special bond with the animal. But what Sandra and many others failed to understand was the fundamental nature of what Travis really was. Chimpanzees share 99% of their DNA with humans, making them incredibly intelligent, But this intelligence comes paired with unpredictable and potentially dangerous behaviors that millions of years of evolution have hardwired into their brains. As Travis matured from a cute, manageable baby into a full-grown adult male chimpanzee, his physical capabilities became truly formidable. Travis's hands were capable of exerting crushing force that could easily break bones. His jaw muscles, designed by nature to tear through tough vegetation and meat, could deliver a bite force of over 1,300 pounds per square inch, more powerful than most large predators. Most importantly, Travis retained all the territorial and hierarchical instincts of a wild chimpanzee, instincts that could be triggered without warning by factors that humans might never recognize or understand. The warning signs of Travis's increasingly dangerous behavior have been accumulating for months, but Sandra's emotional attachment to the animal blinded her to the growing threat. Travis had become increasingly territorial and possessive of Sandra, showing clear signs of aggression toward visitors and strangers. He had attacked a police car the previous year, ripping off its side mirror and attempting to open the doors while officers sat inside, terrified by the display of raw power and aggression. Local animal control officers had visited Sandra's property multiple times, warning her about the dangers of keeping such a large and powerful primate, but she consistently dismissed their concerns. Sandra had begun medicating Travis with Xanax, a powerful anti-anxiety medication prescribed for humans in an attempt to control his increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior. What she didn't realize was that psychoactive drugs can have unpredictable and often opposite effects on non-human primates, potentially increasing aggression and reducing inhibitions rather than providing the calming effect she hoped for. Veterinarians and animal behavior experts had warned against this practice, but Sandra continued to administer the medication, convinced that she knew what was best for Travis. The relationship between Sandra and Travis had become increasingly codependent and unhealthy. Sandra treated Travis as her primary emotional support, often talking to him as if he were a human companion, and relying on him for the social interaction that she had lost when her husband died. On that fateful February morning, Sandra woke to find Travis acting more agitated than usual. He had been pacing around the house since early morning, showing signs of distress that Sandra couldn't identify or understand. Travis had managed to get outside, something that happened occasionally but always caused Sarah anxiety due to the potential for him to wander into traffic or encounter neighbors who might not understand his unpredictable nature. The combination of cold weather, his recent medication, and unknown stressors had created a perfect storm of factors that were pushing Travis toward a breaking point that no one could have predicted. In her desperation to get Travis back inside safely, Sandra called the one person she knew she could count on, her dear friend Charla Nash. Sandra knew that Travis was familiar with Charla from her many visits over the years, and she hoped that a familiar face might help calm the agitated animal. Charla, true to her nature, didn't hesitate for even a moment. Before leaving her home, Charla made a decision that she thought might help the situation. She knew that Travis had always been fond of a particular stuffed Elmo doll, one of his favorite toys that often seemed to comfort him when he was upset. Charla grabbed the bright red toy, thinking that bringing Travis something familiar and comforting might help Sandra get him back inside more easily. This simple act of thoughtfulness, so characteristic of Charla's caring nature, would be one of the last normal decisions she would ever make with her own hands. The drive to Sandra's house took only a few minutes. As she pulled into Sandra's driveway at approximately 3:40 p.m., Charla could see Travis in the front yard moving restlessly between the cars parked near the house. His behavior seemed agitated but not immediately threatening, just the actions of a large, confused animal who needed to be guided back to safety. Sandra had already attempted to calm Travis by giving him a dose of Xanax mixed with tea, a practice she had used before when he seemed particularly agitated. However, instead of producing the calming effect as she expected, the medication seemed to have made Travis even more unpredictable and potentially dangerous. As Charla stepped out of her car holding the stuffed Elmo toy and speaking in the gentle, soothing voice she had always used with Travis, everything seemed manageable and under control. For a brief moment, Travis looked at Charla with what appeared to be recognition. His eyes, which had seemed wild and unfocused, appeared to register her presence in a way that gave both women hope that the situation could be resolved peacefully. Charla approached slowly, speaking softly and holding out the Elmo toy, trying to use the same calm, non-threatening demeanor that had worked in countless previous interactions with Travis. Sandra watched from near the front door, ready to help guide Travis back into the house once Charla had gotten his attention and calmed him down. Then, without any warning or apparent trigger, something fundamental snapped in Travis's brain. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. Travis's demeanor shifted from confused agitation to pure predatory aggression in the span of a heartbeat. His eyes, which had seemed almost human-like moments before, became wild and alien, reflecting an intelligence that was no longer friendly or familiar, but had become something dangerous and unpredictable. The medication in his system, combined with stress factors that no human could fully understand, had pushed Travis past a psychological breaking point from which there would be no return. Travis charged toward Charla with explosive speed and power that defied belief. His massive frame, over 200 pounds of solid muscle, moved with terrifying agility. Before Charla could react, before she could even process what was happening, Travis slammed into her with the force of a professional linebacker, but with claws and teeth that no human athlete could ever possess. The impact was so violent and unexpected that Charla's keys flew from her hands, scattering across the cold pavement of Sandra's driveway like metallic confetti, marking the beginning of a nightmare. The stuffed Elmo toy, which Charla had brought as a gesture of kindness and comfort, fell forgotten to the ground as Travis knocked her down beside her car. The bright red fabric would soon be stained with blood as the attack that followed unfolded with methodical and horrifying brutality. Travis's assault was not the random violence of a confused animal. It was focused, deliberate, and devastating in its precision and intensity. What happened next was a scene of unimaginable horror that would haunt everyone who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. Travis focused first on Charla's face and hands, the parts of her body that were most exposed and vulnerable as she tried desperately to protect herself from his assault. Travis's powerful jaws, designed by millions of years of evolution to tear through tough vegetation and meat, clamped down on Charla's facial features with crushing force that no human could withstand. The sounds of bones breaking mixed with Charla's screams in a symphony of horror that echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Sandra, witnessing the attack from her position near the front door, was initially frozen by the shock and horror of what she was seeing. Her beloved Travis, the animal she had raised from infancy and treated as her own child, had transformed into a monster that was systematically destroying her closest friend. Breaking free from her shock, Sandra grabbed a shovel from her garage and ran outside, screaming at Travis to stop the attack. She struck him repeatedly, but the 200-pound chimpanzee barely seemed to notice her efforts. The shovel, which would have been devastating against a human attacker, was little more than an annoyance to Travis's powerful frame. His focus remained entirely on Charla, and Sandra's intervention only seemed to increase his determination to complete his assault. In growing desperation, Sandra ran back into her house and grabbed a large butcher knife from her kitchen. She returned to the scene of the attack and began stabbing Travis multiple times in the back and torso, driving the blade deep into his body with all the strength her 70-year-old frame could muster. Blood from Travis's wounds mixed with Charla's on the cold pavement, creating a horrific scene that looked like something from a nightmare rather than reality. The stab wounds, which would have been fatal to most creatures, only seemed to enrage Travis further. Pain and injury triggered even more aggressive responses, and he turned his attention back to Charla with renewed fury and determination. The attack continued with unrelenting brutality as Travis used his powerful hands to tear at Charla's scalp and ears, his claws ripping through skin and hair with ease. Her fingers were bitten off one by one as she desperately tried to protect her face and head from his assault, each digit severed with the casual efficiency of a predator consuming prey. Blood pooled on the cold pavement around Charla's motionless form as Travis continued his relentless assault. Her screams, which had initially been loud and desperate, gradually weakened as shock began to set in, her body's natural response to the massive trauma she was experiencing. Sandra, covered in blood from her attempts to stop the attack and from Travis's own wounds, finally managed to reach her phone and dial 911. Her voice, barely recognizable through her panic and terror, delivered one of the most chilling emergency calls ever recorded by the Stamford Police Department. The desperation in her voice conveyed the horror of what was happening as she pleaded for immediate help. The attack lasted approximately 12 minutes, though for Charla, it must have felt like an eternity of unending agony and terror. Travis only stopped his assault when the distant sounds of police sirens could be heard approaching through the quiet neighborhood. Backing away from Charla's motionless and bloodied form, he had retreated toward the house where he had spent most of his life. When Officer Frank Chiafari arrived on the scene, he was confronted with a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Travis, still covered in blood from his victim and his own stab wounds, approached the police cruiser with an almost casual demeanor that was more terrifying than any display of aggression could have been. The chimpanzee actually opened the door of the patrol car, demonstrating the intelligence and dexterity that had made him seem so human-like in happier times, but now served only to emphasize the horror of what he had become. Officer Chiafari, faced with a 200-pound predator whose mouth and hands were still stained with human blood, had no choice but to draw his weapon. Travis stared at the officer with eyes that seemed to flicker between recognition and wild aggression, his lips pulled back to reveal the same teeth that had just destroyed a human being. Left with no alternative and fearing for his own safety as well as that of any other potential victims, Officer Chiafari fired multiple shots at close range, finally ending the nightmare that had begun with a simple phone call asking for help. Paramedics who arrived at the scene found Charla barely clinging to life, her injuries so severe and extensive that even experienced first responders who had seen countless accidents and violent crimes were visibly shaken by what they witnessed. She had lost both hands completely, torn away by Travis's powerful jaws and claws. Her nose, lips, and eyelids had been destroyed, leaving her face a mask of raw tissue and exposed bone. Her facial bones were crushed beyond recognition, and she had suffered massive blood loss that should have been fatal under normal circumstances. The fact that Charla survived the initial attack was nothing short of miraculous. Charla was rushed to Stamford Hospital, where a team of surgeons led by Dr. Maria Semenau worked for over 7 hours in the first of what would become dozens of operations over the coming months and years. Some of the surgeons who worked on Charla's case required professional counseling afterward to cope with the psychological trauma of what they had witnessed and worked to repair. Over the following months and years, Charla underwent more than 20 major surgeries in an attempt to rebuild her shattered life and restore some semblance of normal function to her devastated body. She lost her sight permanently due to severe infections that developed from the attack, complications that arose despite the best efforts of her medical team. In 2011, Charla became one of the first people in the United States to receive a full-face transplant, a groundbreaking 20-hour surgical procedure that offered her a chance at a more normal appearance and improved quality of life. The surgery, performed by a team of specialists, involved transplanting facial tissue from a donor including skin, muscle, nerves, and blood vessels. While the procedure was successful in giving Charla a new face, she would never look the same as she had before the attack, and the psychological adjustment to her new appearance presented its own set of challenges. Sandra Harold, while not facing criminal charges due to Connecticut's laws at the time, was sued by Charla for $50 million in damages. The lawsuit brought attention to the legal and financial responsibilities of exotic animal owners, and the inadequacy of existing insurance policies to cover such catastrophic incidents. The case also revealed the complex web of factors that had contributed to the tragedy. Investigators discovered that Travis had been suffering from Lyme disease, which may have affected his behavior and contributed to his aggression. The Xanax that Sandra had been giving him was found to potentially exacerbate aggressive tendencies in primates rather than calm them. The combination of illness, medication, and the stress of his unnatural living situation had created a perfect storm that culminated in the devastating attack. Today, more than a decade later, Charla Nash continues her recovery with remarkable courage and determination that has inspired millions of people around the world. Despite losing her sight, hands, and facial features, she has refused to let the attack define her life or limit her aspirations. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now. Thanks for watching.